on, Lieutenant Governor. That excludes you, given that you're driving. We appreciate you being with us. Members of the public, we certainly appreciate you joining for the call. We do ask that you leave your camera off until you join us for public comment. On that note, we do reserve time towards the end of every meeting for public comment. If you would like to address the task force members, we ask that you drop a message in the chat to Carrie Steele or myself, Barrick Abramson, just letting us know your name, your organization, if you're speaking on behalf of one, and we'll get you queued up for public comment. Last administrative item, we do ask that folks refrain from using the chat unless it's urgent and you need to contact me as the host. Use of the chat can be distracting to all members, and particularly those who use screen readers or other technologies. With that, I'm going to go ahead and dive us in and give a quick overview of the plans for today's meeting. Then we'll get right into the conversations. With today, we are really starting to look ahead at what we see as a big shift in the work of the subcommittees and therefore the task force. We've spent most of the last 4 to 5 months with each of the 4 subcommittees, starting off with brainstorming around the challenges that their subcommittee was tasked with addressing, some of the folks that they wanted to hear from, whether those were experts or people with different lived experiences. We've had a series of panels for each of the subcommittees that Carrie's going to talk a little bit about today. We do have a few more panels coming up for each of those subcommittees, but as we shift into June, we're really going to shift into the meaty and somewhat difficult work of turning the tasks assigned into recommendations. So we're going to talk a little bit about our approach to the remaining panels, to how we're going to use time this summer, which is going to involve some extra meetings for each of the subcommittees as they start putting specific ideas on the table. We're also going to use a big chunk of today's time for me to hear from all of you as the Task Force Executive Committee on the framework of ideas that you would like to see brought to you. And I'll touch on that when we get to that section, probably around 4 p.m. But we're going to ask you how you'd like that information brought to you. We're going to need to talk about some things like how we're going to approach voting on different recommendations, the level of specificity that you want to see in these things. And we'll start talking about what are going to be the tasks that the exec committee will need to undertake when they receive those recommendations. But first, in your packet for today's meeting, you should have received the minutes for each of the subcommittee. And given that I don't want to burn up today's time addressing something that you hopefully had the opportunity to review, but I will set aside a few minutes before I ask Carrie to talk to the panels or speak about the panels to address any questions anyone has and anything you saw in the minutes or about anything going on with any of the subcommittees. So with that, I'll open it to the floor for the task force members. If anyone has any questions about what's happening with the subcommittees or anything you saw in the minutes.
This is Julie. So are we going to go through each subcommittee?
We certainly,
Okay.
Yeah. Is there one that you'd like to start with, Julie?
Yeah, now I need to find it again. I just had it open. Okay, here it is. Yeah, it was the rewrite.
Yeah.
And this is probably totally my fault for not paying attention and reading agendas, but there was a lot of discussion about CCRD and their role with CADA, and as their data shows, they have a horrible reputation in our community. So I just wanted to know if there was any kind of decision or thought about them being part of why we need the law to be strong is so people cannot use CCRD. And so I'm just kind of wondering if there was discussion about that. I think right now I have two cases that both came from legislators with complaints about how ableist and awful they are. So I just got concerned when I saw that they were that engaged in the discussion, because we want a process where you don't have to go through them.
Yeah, let me speak to, I think, what's the underlying question of why did you read a set of minutes that seemed to be all about CCRD? That was part of the panel discussions or presenters that we put together in response to member requests. So we had the representative from CCRD, Aubrey, came and spoke strictly about the process and what their role is, so members could understand how CCRD fits into things. And I'll let Carrie talk when we get to panels. At the next meeting, we're going to hear from another individual, Spencer Kontnick, who has been, so you know Spencer. For those who don't, Spencer was actually a complainant in a case after he
Yep.
was dismissed from jury, and he functions as he will describe himself, a for-profit attorney. So he'll offer his perspective of what are some of the challenges or disincentives to an attorney in taking on cases. But Julie, the reason you see so much about CCRD is because the discussion was with Aubrey, so members could really understand what the process is that CCRD oversees.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'm wondering if the committee might want to take on, and this might be out of the scope or not appropriate, but, you know, we feel very strong. That's why we fought so hard for, you know, no exhaustion requirements, because we don't want to deal with them. But the ideal perfect situation would be as if they were an agency that could deal appropriately with our community. So I don't know if there's any place in here, or that might even be the government committee, to look at some reform of CCRD as well. I mean, again, I don't know if where that best belongs, but I just wanted to, I was alarmed when I saw that. So thank you for putting my mind at ease that that was just part of the fact finding.
Yeah.
But thank you.
No, my pleasure. And I'm happy to bring the idea. I make no commitment, but I'll bring that idea to both of those subcommittees. I will tell you, Julie, that there has been discussion. I don't think any recommendations or advocacy has been done yet around the question of administrative remedies and the challenges that some have seen in those. So as they get into their meetings, really workshopping solutions in June, I fully expect that to be a topic on the table. And if there's anything you want to send to me, I'm happy to share it with either government or the rewrite subcommittee. I'm not sure exactly where or if any reforms to the division would fall in our purview, but I think when we're talking about CADA itself and the right to seek remedies, and or if everyone's able to access the services they need, we can certainly raise that there. I'm wondering if there are specific concerns that you want to raise here, or if you'd rather do it with the subcommittee, just so we're clear and we can bring it to the group.
I don't want to dominate this whole meeting. I mean, you know,
Let's take 5 minutes on this, though. I think if you've got concerns, I want to make sure we understand it, because we can't have a conversation about changing it if I'm not clear on what the issue is.
So yeah, our experience is that they tend to be very disinterested in disability. They don't tend to do any outreach. They also don't often, we get a lot of complaints of people saying, I gave them witnesses, I gave them stuff, and they never investigated, like they never went further. Their high finding of no cause. So those are some of the concerns that we've heard. You know, we have had cases where they found no cause and we successfully sued. Now, even if they were perfect, we would never support an exhaustion requirement. I'm just speaking from CCDC, and I think I speak, and Elizabeth can yell at me if I'm wrong, but I think I speak for all the disability rights organizations in the state that none of us would ever support exhaustion.
Understood. And Julie, if it's okay, I may follow up with you offline to see if there's more that makes sense to bring, but I appreciate that.
And I guess one other thing with CCRD that they tend to be particularly bad at is like cognitive communication accommodations. Like they might get a sign language interpreter, but like when someone says, I can't listen to a message that's really fast, or I need more time, or I don't understand this and I need help, they're just like, no. I mean, they just will not do that at all.
Understood. Thank you. Elizabeth, let me bring you in and then just everyone, so you know, I'm aware Lieutenant Governor is going to have to hop in about 15-20 minutes to an event, so I want to make sure I bring her in. But Ms. Moran, what are you thinking?
Thank you. So I would second everything that Julie said. She's absolutely right. We are aligned on this issue. And to her point around, you've heard me talk a lot, Barrick, about effective communication and the need for effective communication services and supports under Title II of the ADA, Title II and III of the ADA. And we are woefully behind on that. And so, and that is a #1 complaint. For instance, when someone says, my communication support is, not only do I need you to slow down, but I need you to use plain English, simple words. I need you to, and what they are met with is, well, we don't have the time, the money, the resources, the capacity, you name it. We can't do that. And to which I would argue, we should have already been doing that for 34 years. And so I share the concerns, and certainly from a community of stakeholders that I work with regularly who have communication disabilities. I would like to see that issue lifted up.
I appreciate that. I will make a note to underscore that. I will also, Julia and Elizabeth, tell both of you that the issue of plain language and the issue of effective communications are topics that the rewrite subcommittee has surfaced and will be part of this summer's discussions with them making recommendations. To be clear, it has not been specifically relating to CCRD, but it has been in respect to all rights that are protected under the ADA and under CADA, and where we may want to strengthen those in Colorado law. Lieutenant Governor, I kind of already started taking us down some rabbit holes, which I will just forewarn to everyone I'm going to continue to do today so we can really get into the meat of the conversations. But Manuel, we've got you for a few minutes and we're thinking big picture about the need for these subcommittees to start bringing concepts that make sense for this group to be able to digest and take some action on, or just on the overall process. I'm wondering if you'd like to make any comments.
Yeah, I pulled over, so I'm parked and real
Oh,
close
thank
to my
you.
next event. So I appreciate the opportunity to say good afternoon to the task force members and guests. Believe it or not, this meeting is a significant milestone because this coming Sunday is the 1-year anniversary of the passage on House Bill 23-1296 that created this task force to study the rights of persons with disabilities. I don't know where the time goes, but it does go. So I'm excited that the task force is beginning to pivot from brainstorming and hearing from subject matter experts to beginning to really hone in on, specific recommendations. So I think as the executive committee, we probably need to set expectations for the subcommittees, but I think it's also important for us to listen to them on the nuanced details that they've been discussing at great length. Hearing from the subject matter experts at the subcommittee so far has been really enlightening for me, and I think also for the subcommittee members as well. As I noted in the document that Barrick and Carrie sent out with the agenda, they're still looking for additional perspectives to include on subject matter panels for the subcommittees. And I would really like to highlight the need to hear from the deaf community because during the Behavioral Health Task Force listening sessions that we had a few years ago, the deaf presentations were especially enlightening to me and when it came to mental health. So I'm sure they'd be very enlightening on a lot of the other issues that we're grappling with. So and as we all know, but nobody's counting, this legislative session is quickly winding to a close. I think we have 10 days left. As we all know, there have been a number of bills introduced. Many are on track to be passed, targeted at improving access and opportunities for Coloradans with disabilities. And once the recommendations from this task force come out, the General Assembly will have clear direction on what to prioritize in the near future for the next legislative session and hopefully beyond. So the other thing is, as we work towards this task force's final report later this year, I'd like to recommend that we consider the implementation of their recommendations, including any legislation or budget actions that result from the recommendations and how they can be monitored. Many of the ideas being considered by the subcommittees will require multiple years to fully implement, probably after I'm gone. So it will be important for people beyond this task force to understand the intent of the recommendations being made in case those of us here today are not in positions to see the recommendations implemented. So we should also be thinking about what our vision for success is in 1 year, in 5 years, and even 10 years into the future. What does that look like? So with that, I'll turn it over to Barrick. I do have to be at this other event at 4:05, so I'll probably be checking out about 4, but I'm hoping it won't last long and I can jump back on. So Barrick, back to you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. And members of the task force, I'm going to work with you over the next 30 to 60 minutes to decide how much of this conversation we had today with what is, just to be clear, about half of our members. On the one hand, that gives me the opportunity to go deep with those of you who are here. I also want to make sure that we have this important conversation with everyone. So I will look to you and when we get into issues to tell me, hey, maybe we want to hold this till we have additional folks. Julie, I think you're raising your hand at me.
Yes, when we were talking about people not being here, when I was going through my May calendar today, I realized our meeting is on Memorial Day. And I'm good with that, but I don't think anyone else is. So I told myself I would raise that.
I appreciate you flagging that, and Carrie flagged that to me. So that's one of the things that we will address. And that's one of the places where you being the ones that joined this call, you're going to have an outweighted voice on what we do with that May meeting. But no, Julie, we will not be meeting on Memorial Day. Why don't I if it's
And
okay,
Barrick, I'm sorry, is this
Hi,
Kirsten? I just
Kirsten.
wanted to let you know I joined late, so I am here if you were counting me as one of the people.
I appreciate that, and I do see you on my screen, so I'm glad you could join us. And it's, I want to fully recognize that particularly our elected officials are in this final 7-10 day sprint, so it's no aspersion on them at all. Let me continue with questions about any of the subcommittee minutes, and then I want to have Carrie talk a little bit about remaining panels and where we're needing voices. Does anyone have questions about the materials you saw for the meetings that have already taken place? I'm seeing or hearing none. Julie, unless you were leaning in with an additional one, I'm always trying to read. Well,
The housing one looked great. I guess, yeah, it's hard not knowing like where things are going. Because like the government one, we're very interested in knowing which governments do not have the ability to do online access to meetings, meaning that which governments are 100% in person now and not doing any remote work.
And I don't have an answer for that. I will see if I can find it out, and if not, if that's something that the subcommittee wants to address, making sure that information is available.
Yeah, the
Carrie-
government claimed that they needed a ton of money to just do remote meetings by request. So I'm just curious who's not already doing that.
Yep. And Carrie, I'm sorry to do this over the full open line, but Representative Ortiz, if you could text him the link. Thank you very much. Carrie, when you're done with that, do you want to talk about the panels and who we've got coming up and where we could use some assistance?
I can certainly do that. There you go. Rep Ortiz should have the link.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So you guys should have all received also as part of your materials for the meeting a list of requests from the subcommittees about what voices they still need to or would like to hear from. We kind of compiled this list of over 100 requests and recommendations, many of whom you guys introduced us to, but there's still some gaps in perspectives that we'd like to address, whether that's through some continued panel discussions over the summer or engaging some other way through some of the stakeholding that will be developed over the next several weeks. So there's that piece. I think for those of you who were able to attend April panel discussions with the subcommittees, they, as the LG said, they were really wonderful, very informative. We've had the good fortune of having some great people on the line with us. So going into May, I think we have some other good panel discussions. In the government subcommittee, I'll just run through these in case you guys are familiar with any of these folks and their work. Allison Butler, she is the Director of Division and Disability Rights at the Human Rights and Community Partnerships over at the City and County of Denver. Christina Erickson will also be joining the government subcommittee. She's actually one of the members of the outdoor subcommittee. She has just taken a position at the state as policy advisor and partnership liaison for the state of Colorado's Developmental Disabilities Council. Both of those ladies have wonderful knowledge about working inside government agencies. And lastly will be Kevin McDaniels. He is the statewide equity manager of accessibility. So he is also a big book of knowledge. All those folks we're excited for that panel discussion in May. The outdoors subcommittee, we continue to have a lot of engagement from folks across the spectrum. We're going to have 2 members from Great Outdoors Colorado joining us, Tilla Larson and Chris Yon Farrell. We'll also be joined by Wendy Padilla. She's the Chief Operating Officer at the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, and Topher Downham, who works for the city of Boulder. He's a trail advocate and is very familiar with the government programs as they relate to accessibility to the outdoors up there. Housing is coming together really well. We are going to have a CU professor, Elena Sabinson. She is the assistant professor, environmental design up at University of Colorado. She works on a lot of inclusive housing initiatives, as well as Tim Dolan from Inclusive Housing Colorado, and 2 representatives from the Kelsey, which is an affordable housing developer that is out in the Bay Area currently, making their way into Colorado. They have a really good perspective on a bunch of forward-thinking accessibility housing solutions. So Barrick and I will be talking to them actually later this week, and we'll have more information. And as Barrick mentioned, the Rewrite Subcommittee, we will have Spencer Kotnick, who's an attorney and was also a victim of discrimination himself. He will be representing a for-profit law office for persons with disabilities. So that is just the sum of it. We've been working to put together guest bios for everyone, and I will send those around to you as soon as they are complete.
So with that, let me ask if folks have questions about the panels, and I'm buying Rep Ortiz a minute because Rep Ortiz, I see that you've joined, and I do want to give you a minute to provide any update or words to the group if we've got you in between meetings or hearings right now. But does anyone have any questions about the panelists that Carrie discussed? I'm not getting any questions. Rep Ortiz, are you in a place where you can speak?
Just briefly, I want to reiterate my thanks for you and Carrie and the ways that you're not just facilitating this, but I'm really appreciative of the social media posts that I see to get the word out so we can hopefully get more people involved. There's been various messages to different legislators around some of these issues, so really making sure that we get them roped in for public comment part, and just excited to see how we keep moving forward. So just want to thank everyone for their time and their work.
Thank you, Rep Ortiz. And I want to assure you, although we haven't had the chance to talk, we did get looped in by Senator Roberts, who I know that his office had spoken with yours about a constituent with an interest in this task force, and Carrie and I are setting up a conversation with them about that. Before I move us into the structure and how we're approaching this summer and really start leaning into how we're going to approach recommendation development, does anyone have any questions about where we are with any of the subcommittees? Okay, what I'm going to do is shift gears into a forward-looking conversation. We're going to talk about how each of these subcommittees is going to take the brainstorming they've done, the reading we brought them, the panelists they've heard from, and some remaining research they've requested, and start dialing that in to be recommendations to provide to each of you and to this task force. As you are all aware, each subcommittee is required to submit their recommendations to the task force by the 1st of December. The task force is then required to submit its final report the last week, I believe it's January 25th of next year. My goal is to try to get ahead of that schedule so everyone has proper time to consider those recommendations and where there may need to be action. In getting everyone there, the reality is most of these subcommittees are going to need to meet more than once. Fortunately, everyone who has been volunteering their time has enthusiastically agreed to do so. We're also talking with members about whether it makes sense to offer some in-person or hybrid time to spend a little bit more time really digging into these issues. What I want to talk with everyone about today is twofold. Number one, I'm going to go committee by committee, and I want to make sure that we're addressing the full scope of issues that are important to all of you that fall within the purview of this task force. We will absolutely be addressing each charge that was laid out in 1296. Within that, though, I know there is a lot of nuance. There are a lot of items that are important to individual task force members and to everyone. So I want to make sure that we include those in the conversations. The way we're going to be approaching this with the subcommittees, we're working with them right now to identify what is the sequencing for developing the recommendations. In some cases, it does not necessarily matter what order they go in. So the government subcommittee, for example, whether they tackle running for and serving in elected office or accessing government services, which one comes first or second isn't as critical as the fact that they address both. In the case of something like the CATA rewrite, we will most likely be holding discussions about definitions for the end so we can add up to all of them. We will then spend several meetings going deep into each of these areas and surfacing recommendations. That brings me to the second part of the conversation we're going to have today, and that is my question to all of you of what type of framework of recommendations and solutions you want brought to all of you. And by that, what I mean, to what extent do you want these groups, the subcommittees, to identify the end state and the outcome they're trying to achieve with change versus what the mechanism or the lever is or the specific means of achieving it? And how much of that would you rather they focus on the outcomes and you all really workshop how to accomplish it? I think there's a critical balance because frankly, it would be very easy to go down the rabbit hole of do we change this rule, do we change this regulation? And I think it's important to remember the professional backgrounds of those involved. We're probably going to need to engage some attorneys along the way, but I want to make sure we're making the best use of everyone's time while providing you all with the most actionable ideas to put together. I will also preview that we have not yet established, and I'm going to ask us to do this at the next meeting, how you all want to approach things like voting on the recommendations and what you want to receive again from these subcommittees. It is unlikely that every recommendation from every subcommittee will be unanimous. So what I will need to know from all of you, we've talked about whether we name people, but how much you want to understand the reason some people didn't support an individual idea. So that's the full scope of what I want to discuss today. I'm going to kind of sequence it as committee by committee. Are there specific issues you're either worried we don't have on our radar or just want to really highlight? And then we'll go into what should be the level of detail of all of the reports together.
Eric, did you say that they do have to be unanimous or don't have to be unanimous?
There is nothing that requires them to be unanimous. So with that, I'm going to start with the subcommittees. I'm going to call out the subcommittee, and then I just want an open conversation in terms of what you want to make sure they're discussing, and if there's specific ideas you have in what you'd like to receive. And when I say that, I don't mean specific recommendations you're hoping for, but what the style and structure of them is. And let's first start with the government subcommittee. And as a reminder, the government subcommittee has three primary areas of their work: barriers to running for and serving in office, barriers to seeking employment and serving employment, working in government, and barriers to accessing government services. Representative Ortiz, as you know, I usually don't call out legislation that's been going back and forth, but I know there was a fiscal note that affected a piece of legislation that does intersect with the government subcommittee and the discussions of accessing public discussions. Is there anything you would like to share if you're in a place to do so?
If you'll move to others first, I'll be able to hear in about a minute.
Okay, I will come back to that then. So with those being the big buckets, and Rep Ortiz, just flag me when you're ready. When you're thinking about the government subcommittee, are there any topics that you want to flag for our attention as we go into discussing the recommendations and solutions, or simply aspects that you want to make sure are on the subcommittee's radars to discuss? Representative Ortiz, jump in, please.
Yep. So if you could do me a brief favor and repeat the question. I think it was about focusing on certain areas. Oh, you were talking about legislation got slapped with fiscal note. That's right. Yeah. So this is something that the subcommittee needs to keep in mind, is that it was supremely frustrating and it wasn't even my bill. It was a bill coming forward to try and mandate virtual participation at all levels of government, because one, we did that during COVID, because again, when able bodies were threatened, people can do stuff no problem and real quick. And I don't remember there being an additional fiscal note to do that. We just did it. And it's not like people's budget got cut afterwards. So there needs to be a real discussion about how we audit, and that can be a possible recommendation on how we audit and hold fiscal notes accountable. Because what it seems like to me is when departments and or certain power players don't want something, they overinflate fiscal notes. And when they do want something, they underinflate fiscal notes. That's a huge barrier to securing our basic access in government. I want to call that out and name it for what it is.
Thank you, Representative Ortiz. And I'm going to pick up where you left that. I think it raises three important things for this task force to consider. Number one, as the representative just put on the table, does there need to be some mechanism you all want to have a conversation about, or want that subcommittee to, when it comes to fiscal note implications and audit or oversight of that? I think it also highlights two additional things for you all to consider. Number one, when you're getting recommendations from the subcommittee, to what extent do you want their recommendations to be the North Star and ideal? To what extent do you want them to also include minimal actions or a ladder of actions moving towards that North Star? I think you all need to consider what may happen if you set a low floor, or if the only recommendation we get is that high bar. And then I think you're also going to want to, as you receive the recommendations, contemplate, as the Lieutenant Governor teed up, what means of oversight or monitoring do you want to include as you advance any recommendations to ensure that things are accomplishing what they're intended to and being acted on with fidelity. Rep Ortiz, I see your hand back up, and then I'll go to Julie after you.
Apologies, I left it up. I'm going to go ahead and lower it now and let Julie go first, and I'll clean up or follow up if she has something that sparks.
All right, Julie, jump in.
Well, I just think that we should, that they should go with the, I mean, when you say North Star, to me, that sounds like the utopian thing. I think it's, what do we need for people in Colorado to be fully included, which is going to be beyond the bare minimum, but may not be everything is perfect. If it's something that I think they can, through their expertise, that they realize, well, we can't do this in 1 year, they should maybe outline like a 3-step process, like say, do this in 2025, do this in 2027, and by 2030, this should be totally done. Or, like, I think that if it, and again, I think for a lot of this, it's, again, we're 34 years out from the ADA. It shouldn't be these long drawn out things, but if there is something that requires steps, then they should outline it. But I'd caution against like because if something is like so out there, everyone's going to say that's impossible. But I also would really push back against a bare minimum thing, because we can do better than that in Colorado. And my understanding is that it's the desire of the legislature and this administration that we do better than the bare minimum.
I appreciate that. And this is exactly the kind of guidance that we want from all of you. And those of you who have been on subcommittees, you have probably heard me tell everyone on those subcommittees, it's rare that someone is going to make their ideas more aspirational. And that we want to make sure we're setting that Colorado doesn't view what is as the ceiling, but rather the floor. Elizabeth, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Barrick. So I would ditto everything that Julie just said. And this is what I would say. I think we ask for the North Star. If there's whittling down that needs to be done, then I think we can do that later. But that should not be our starting point. I've grown increasingly weary as I've gotten older of the expectation that we will settle for good enough. And I'm sorry, that's not good enough. If we want true equity, we want true inclusion, we want true access in all aspects of life, and whether that's governance or any other part of equity in the state of Colorado, I would like us to be the gold standard. And so that's where we should start. I love Julie's idea, by the way, of in the event that, let's say, folks are getting creative, and I hope they will. I hope they will be out of the box thinkers. I hope they will come with ideas that we all say are crazy. Because quite frankly, if you look back in history, it was the ideas that were absolutely crazy and people thought, oh my God, that's never going to happen. That's a wackadoodle idea that we were able to make real change with. And so I hope they will be creative. I hope they will be out of the box. I hope it'll be the North Star. I hope it'll be the whole solar system. And if we need to whittle it down, then we will do that once we have those ideas. But I don't want us to start with what can we settle for? And I worry about having that even on the table. I really want to see what are the creative ideas we have. And then like I said with Julie, I love the idea of, and if they're those crazy out there ideas, out of the box ideas, what do they think as experts in their field is the timeline and the fiscal note, the money that's going to be associated with doing it? And then we figure out how do we support that piece. I'm running a bill right now. I'm working with legislators right now on a bill that's a huge system change around guardianship. And you know what I'm hearing? We can't afford it. What are you talking about? We can't afford it. It's been 23 years since we did the last comprehensive change in the state, and we need it. We need to switch it from being friendly for the professionals and convenient for the people who work in this field. And we need to be looking at the rights of people who are subject to guardianships and conservatorships. And I feel like this is sort of a parallel. Like we have to do better. And so I want to start up there and work our way back if we need to. But I don't want to start with, here's the gold standard, but here's what you could settle for. Like that just makes me cringe.
No, message heard clearly. And I want to assure you, I had no intention of going to these groups and saying, what's the least you could tolerate? What I want to do is have this conversation with all of you. This is largely where I expected, but I owed it to all of you, and I continue to hear from you. Elizabeth, I think you and I have some connected wires, because one of the things I do in all of these activities is require everyone to give me one crazy, out of the box, implausible solution that they want to put on the table, because that's where I want us starting, and we'll work from there. One thing that you raised that I would like to hear from the whole committee, you mentioned asking folks about things like, based on their professional experience, the fiscal note and issues like that. I want to make sure that we don't mire them as lived experience and subject matter experts in too much process, but I want you to push me if I'm in the wrong direction. I had anticipated that, frankly, a lot of that is going to fall on you all to sort out the how of getting there. But tell me what kinds of information you would like to get from the subcommittees.
I don't know that I understand the question.
So when you think of this task force, everyone on this call will ultimately be responsible to receive the recommendations of the subcommittees and develop a master report that we put forward next January on recommended actions to be taken by the state and others if it comes to best practices. To what extent do you want the subcommittees to provide you simply recommendations on the high bar and aspirational outcome or end conditions? And how much do you want them to tell you, here is the cost of doing this, here is the mechanism of change, versus give you the end point and you all workshop how to get there?
I don't know. I want to. Oh, sorry, Elizabeth, your hand.
So I'll be really quick. Julie. I was just going to say, I don't know that I necessarily want the subcommittees to come up with, a price tag or anything like that. But what I would like is just some general information, or these are the things that we think are going to cost a whole lot of money, right? I don't know that I want to task them with that, and that very well may not be their area of expertise, right? That might be unfair of us to say, oh, and how much would that cost, right? But I think that just having an idea of, what are some of the things that we can do right now here in Colorado that are no cost? And then what are the things that we know are going to cost some money? And then what are the things, as you say, they're the crazy ideas, the really out of the box ideas that we go, we have no idea how much that's going to cost. I don't know that, like I said, I don't know that I want to task them with being unreasonable about giving, exact figures, but just some ideas about, kind of what do we think are the things that we could do, and where do they fall?
Understood. Let me go, Julie, get you in and then bring Representative Ortiz back in.
Well, I agree. I think, we have a process to do fiscal notes, and that needs to go through that process. And again, some of us have some issues with that, but that, we need to do that process. But I think the different committees are going to have different levels of expertise. So for example, with the rewrite, I expect the people on that committee to be able to say, this is exactly what statute needs to change and how, whereas some of the other committees might not be able to, they might just need to say, this is the problem. And then ledge staff or someone who's paid to do this needs to figure out the details. But I just think it's going to differ by committee. But it doesn't matter what they think it's going to cost. It matters what fiscal note staff say it's going to cost.
Understood and completely hear you and agree. These are all going to look different. We just wanted to do some level setting with all of you. Representative Ortiz, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I kind of want to piggyback off of what Julie said, because it's really going to be about solving problems.
Yep.
So like, for example, the running for office, it's obvious getting up, like we got to look at getting on the ballot. So like talking to candidates that have successfully gotten on the ballot and gotten elected and, making the statement, I'll just speak for myself. Obviously, the most accessible way to get on the ballot is caucusing. It just is. Does that mean that people with disabilities can't get on through signature gathering? No. But then we need to look at ways to make that more accessible as well, whether we're talking about electronic signature, giving more time, which we've done that latter part, another bill, right? Like we need to be looking at problem, solution, and the different solutions, and then kind of see which solutions are unanimous and which ones are split. I still want to know about them, even if they're not unanimous, because the bottom line is we just do have people that aren't going to be down with the cause, no offense, when it comes to the basic rights, the same way as someone that lives this way, right? Like outdoor sports. I'm sure that you're probably going to have lift manufacturers being like, well, it's going to be more expensive if we have to design for children's safety and accessibility, which is total horse crap, because there is a way to make it mutually beneficial. So how do we put pressure on them to do that, right? And maybe that's the solution. It is, recommending that they come together to talk about design, and in future design, maybe it doesn't have to happen right away, but future design. Also, like, let's put some of the onus on the manufacturers of adaptive sports equipment. What can we do to make the adaptive sports equipment more accessible to the outdoor spaces, right? So like, those are the type of bottom lines that I'm going to be looking for.
I'll be downstairs in finance, just let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, so those are going to be the type of solution-oriented recommendations that I'm looking for from committees. Same thing with like housing access, for example. I felt like we spent so much time talking about infrastructure and about throwing or allocating more money at it before we even talked about what does accessible housing mean. And that is obviously based on one individual's motivations behind this. I'm not saying there's not a reality where money needs to be discussed, but like, I am looking for solutions for the very obvious problems that this task force was created around.
Understood. Thank you. And one thing I didn't mention, because I didn't envision it, it needs a lot of discussion, although I will open it. One of the additional components will be, and folks have identified what might be the costs or what might be factors here. We will be workshopping with this group so they bring to you what might be some of the, whether it's implications or considerations. Those may be physical or fiscal or otherwise with all of their recommendations. We're also going to spend a good amount of time workshopping that with all of you. The other thing is the summer, as each of these subcommittees is developing their ideas, we are going to be aggressively engaging stakeholders to react to these ideas as they develop, in part to identify for all of you where the support is, and in part to identify where and what the objections may be to all of this. And that isn't to advocate on either side. It's to stress test all of these and make all of you as informed and equipped as possible going into the development of the recommendations. Not to influence the recommendations, but so you all are aware of where the different stakeholders are in this. I'm going to continue the conversation generally about the reports, but I want to continue going through specific subcommittees. We've talked about the government subcommittee. The rewrite subcommittee, I think, is probably the most straightforward. I think all of you are clear on what topics have already been identified around discussions of administrative remedies, around caps, around emotional distress, and around modernizing caps or limits, as well as talk about definitions. Are there other items that you have not heard the subcommittee is discussing that you want to make sure are addressed in addition to anything and everything that all subcommittees address that needs to be codified within CADA? Okay, although I'm going to move the conversation along, this by no means means that that door is closed today or in the months to continue. The outdoors subcommittee. There are so many aspects of this. I think you've heard the panelists we've heard from, the conversations that are ongoing that revolve around everything from knowledge and education, information about access, to the physical access itself, whether that's parking, whether that's access and admittance through gates, whether that's conditions of the assets and the venues. Are there other aspects related to outdoor subcommittee that either you're concerned are not yet on the radar of the subcommittee, or you just want to highlight and reinforce to Carrie and me to make sure are a topic that gets specific recommendations back to you? Again, I'm not getting any questions here. I will leave the door open. And obviously, I know that we're talking kind of in the theoretical right now. We will make sure all of you continue to get all of the agendas and the minutes. So if you see something, call or text Carrie or me if you want to discuss any of these as they go on. Representative Ortiz.
I think a relevant point of discussion that's going to need to happen around a lot of these subcommittees is how to create systems so that we can address future needs, or so that we can address unmet needs through the task force. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take outdoors specifically. How to create policies within the different departments, and then create an environment where they're used to working with nonprofits and for-profit entities to make sure that we are securing basic access in the future. Because yeah, we might solve a problem for gates, we might solve a problem for ski lifts and for adaptive sports equipment, but how do we create a system that's in place for when future, even questions preemptively, if we get used to doing this work and all of a sudden businesses are like, hey, we better check with Colorado's Disability Opportunity Office to make sure that we're making things accessible, we're not, incurring any liability, right, or doing the right thing. How do we create and incentivize that kind of a system? So that's something I want on everyone's radar in every subcommittee, is what do we utilize and how do we do it?
Understood. And if I could build on that and ask you and then other members, to what extent do you want the subcommittees to not just make the recommendation, but to suggest how you're going to know 1 year, 2 years, 5 years from now, if that recommendation is being, number one, implemented with fidelity, and number two, having the desired effect or outcome? Do you want to hear that from the subcommittees, or do you all want to develop those means of monitoring and future looking, as the representative suggested?
I think, we already have some of that here in the legislature. So like maybe it's incumbent on us as an executive committee to say what already exists, like the SMART Act committee hearings could be an example. Using the CDU office, which would be newer, would be another example. But if the subcommittees want to think of something other than that, and then also in future legislation, building a requirement to do a type of reporting through the SMART Act committee hearing, either in certain intervals or for a certain amount of time, right? So like report after the first 5 years, and you will do so for 2 years for the next five, right? Like there's different things that you can build into each piece of legislation to try and create accountability and ensure that it's working the right way.
Anyone else have thoughts on what type of information you want to receive in tandem with the recommendation? Julie, jump in.
I think it's our responsibility to come up with that. And I think, you know, again, in some cases, the Smart Act stuff works. I think in other cases, it might not be on anyone's radar even. Like, I think the access to government, I don't want an agency to decide if we're doing that right, because for obvious reasons. But I'd like them to give us ideas, but then I think it's up to us to decide as the steering committee what those should be. But I definitely want to hear, because these are subject matter experts on what they think. But we should make the final decision.
Thank you, Julie. And one thing I will circulate to all of you, and if you tell me to do so to the subcommittees, there's about a 2-page document that I have used for a number of years to do a risk analysis and a stress test of recommended changes to systems and policies. And it's a means I use to go through and say, what's the worst case scenario and what's the best case? And just to give you some examples, if we enact this change and we've got an ally in implementing it, what might that look like? If there is a change in leadership and somebody that fundamentally disagrees with this, what is the worst they could do to undermine this? And what are the different factors? So I'll circulate that to all of you for your feedback on it, and we can talk about how to use it. But I like to do that before we put recommendations forward, just to understand best case, worst case scenario. Michael Stone, I'm sorry to call you out, but you've been so quiet and I've been rambling, so I want to make sure I get you into the conversation.
Thank you, Barrick. Michael Stone speaking. Funny, my question is actually to you, because it's been a little bit of a theme. It's come up multiple times, and I'm not certain it's been addressed. But you used the phrase fidelity, and one of the areas that and obviously it's going to come back to us at some point is going to be enforcement. And I really do want that to be front and center at all points. You know, just how is that going to take place? But I wanted to actually start with a question. Just are we addressing that your question about fidelity?
I believe it's being addressed as much as we can with what we know so far. I think the key is going to be every time we bring a recommendation from a subcommittee to all of you, you all are going to have a discussion of what does that look like if it is implemented with fidelity, because I think that needs to be defined and make sure we don't have that wiggle room. A question I will put back to you and the other members is on the question of enforcement. I will tell you, within the government subcommittee and within the rewrite subcommittee, the issue of enforcement has come up frequently. It has also come up in housing, that one of the challenges has been, we have great rules and laws on the book, they're not enforced, and whether that's to resources or priorities. But a question I will put back to you, Michael, and then to everyone is, how much do you want the subcommittees to recommend the means of enforcement? How much do you want them to simply have a conversation, and how much do you all want to take that on? Michael, since I directed it to you, I'll go to you first and then to Rep. Ortiz.
Thank you. I'm actually very much looking forward to hearing how everybody addresses this question. And this has come up with both Julie and Elizabeth, is the caution of imposing limitations on any of them. At the same time, we don't want them to get bogged down. Like, we don't want them to get bogged down in fiscal issues or timelines for that matter. If this is a concept or an idea that they feel strongly about, it needs to come to us. That said, I would really love, I always call it the 2 E's with education and enforcement, to be front and center, and just in the front of their minds on any of and all ideas. The implementation of enforcement, I'm going to really look forward to hearing from my fellow task force members.
Great. So on that, Rep Ortiz, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I mean, the most cost-effective way to enforce our basic civil rights, as has always been the case, whether we're talking about Red Rocks, whether we're talking about Fiddler's Green, whether we're talking about mandating web access, is private right of action. Full stop, dot, period. And it just blows me away how some people think that that is optional. That is the bare minimum, is private right of action, and creating different levels of doing that, because meeting the federal bar is obviously the most difficult and the most expensive. So trying to make sure that we're making it cost effective in this, like, this is when we need the lawyers to chime in, is because being very specific about that language on what we're trying to enforce so we get the desired effect is what we need. Now, like, there could be bigger things. Like, I have bigger pie in the sky dream goals. Like, I would love to see an enforcement entity, like, for example, like Department of Transportation, step up and learn how to do enforcement on aviation, for example, which they say they don't do, right? Or create an entity that looks at basic access codes specifically for building architecture, and that is a part of the process just as seamlessly as fire code is. So, you know, there is a range of what we can do here, but things have to start. The bare minimum has to start with private right of action. We can't do administrative exhaustion or administrative fixes anymore. That has not worked. That will not work. So that's kind of what, if we're talking about enforcement, like, that's the bottom line, is private right of action. What are some of the other ideas then that the task force has that we might be able to move forward with, being cognizant also of, like, the changing and shift of departments' training and culture, if they're going to be able to implement this, and then also the cost.
Understood. Thank you. And I get a thumbs up from Ms. Moran. Any other task force members have thoughts on this enforcement question? Is this something that you're ready to give us guidance on what you want from the subcommittees? Is this going to be a matter of, we really need to start seeing what they're putting forward for you to workshop it?
This is Julie. I think we need to see it. It's hard to answer these questions without seeing it. And I want to make sure that we have enough time for, you know, thoughtful discussion, and also to invite feedback from people we might know who maybe haven't given feedback. But I also don't want to insert ourselves prematurely and stop a good process. So I think, to me, that's what I look to you for, is to say, when should we? And I'm not expecting it's going to be the same time for every committee either.
Now, what I will tee up for all of you, and I'll bring this up again on our not Memorial Day to be rescheduled meeting when we have everyone. But I want to highlight, these subcommittees are going to start as early as June developing lists of potential solutions. Our intention is for those to be, I don't want to downgrade them and call them trial balloons, but the initial ideas we want to get to you, Julie, and to everyone, and to as broad a group in your all networks. So expect from us by late June for us to start identifying things on Engage Dora that subcommittee members have started developing for you and your networks of people to react to. I'm going to move us to housing, and we've talked a little bit around the edges of it. So far in housing, we're talking about things like plain language contracts and even just information about programs and access. We're certainly talking, as we're required, about inventory and projected future needs. We have talked about several of the state and federal funding mechanisms. There was a fairly wonky recent discussion about how the QAPs can be used to drive even more action on housing. There's been a very deliberate conversation around education of individuals, of local governments, of housing authorities, and of developers around both the requirements and how to better educate folks about the options. Are there other aspects of housing that you want to make sure are on our list? Carrie mentioned some of the panelists. We're being intentional to make sure that we're talking about different types of accessibility for different disabilities. but are there other issues that you want to make sure are on our radars?
Whatever we do, there has to be strong enforcement. I mean, like, you know, the time for educate, I mean, like some education maybe, but like the time for education is really past, you know, this has been around. So I think it's like, here's what you need to do. And, you know, again, and maybe you know, if there's a way for carrots, great, but like it, you know, they need to do this because it's the law. And I think we're trying to give people good ideas of how to do things, but it shouldn't be presented as if, oh, this is this brand new thing that we're asking, because it's not.
Understood. And I will tell you, Julie, I don't know if you happen to listen or if you're just channeling the last meeting, but this issue of enforcement was a dominant conversation when we were talking with the folks from HUD and some of our other guests. Let me pull back up at an even higher level. When you think ahead to the task, my goal is going to be to start getting you not only draft ideas as early as late June and into July, but hopefully some pretty fleshed out recommendations into the October time period. Are there specific things that you want to see in those reports in addition to the solution or recommendation itself? We've talked about things like means of monitoring. We've talked about including enforcement. You all are, in addition to your own expertise, are relying on a lot of the time that each of these subcommittees is going deep on these topics. What types of information in the reports we bring up to you will be most helpful to you in understanding those recommendations, in being able to consider, debate, advocate, and advance those recommendations? Are there things that come to mind? And again, I will probably be asking you this question every time I bring you a report, but I want to start thinking now about what types of information you all would find useful. What I may do, because I know I'm asking a lot of questions that are in the abstract, is I will probably bring you all an initial set of recommendations. And I know Rep Ortiz is in the middle of voting, so I'm going to see if I can't get him in a few minutes. What I will probably do is, with at least one or two of the subcommittees, get a couple of their early recommendations where we know they already have ideas together in a very draft form to bring up to all of you for you to react to. Not to react to the specific idea, but to say, hey, Barrick, for us to consider this, we need the background on how they got there, or we need to know what the thoughts were, or we also need these additional factors. So I'll ask all of you to just work with us as we go forward on that. While I wait for Rep Ortiz to get done voting, which I know is a little hectic right now, let me look ahead. I haven't received any requests for public comment, which may mean we end up wrapping a few minutes early. But as Julie flagged at the top of the hour, we're currently scheduled to meet on Memorial Day. And my question is going to be, do you want us to find another day that week? Is that week just kind of become a lost week? Should we look at the week following that? Does anyone have a preference of adjusting our schedule for what is scheduled to be a Memorial Day meeting? My other question for all of you to consider, we've had a number of subcommittees suggest to us that, hey, guys, it's about to be summer, and I'd like to spend the afternoons with my kids, or getting outdoors, or doing other things, or otherwise not talking with you, Barrick, every day at the end of my day. So I want to put it open to all of you. If you'd like to consider alternative times, if you'd like to move it up earlier, or if you want to stay here, it's totally fine. I just want to respect it's Colorado in the summer. So feel free to jump. I'm probably going to just call on each of you. Questions about Memorial Day and question about summer, and we can also email all of you, but any just gut reaction on those?
Barrick, for the Memorial Day thing, if we push it up a week, then that's only 3 weeks in between. And is that enough time for y'all?
No, I would push it a week after if we were going to push it, Kirsten.
No, that's what I meant. If you
I'm sorry, Julie.
if you push it out a week after, then it's only 3 weeks before June. Is that
It-
enough time for y'all? You know, I think it's more a question for you all and not us, because you're the ones who have to do all the work in between meetings.
We will make it happen. I want to work around what works best for all of you without us losing momentum and time. But thank you.
This is Elizabeth. I would be in favor of moving it to either the Monday prior or the Monday after. Both of those would be good. And I like an afternoon slot because
Okay.
my administrative workload is very heavy in the morning. It's much harder for me to get away.
Got it. Understood. And we'll send out an email and follow up with people. I see a thumbs up from Julie. Rep Ortiz, well, I've got you between votes.
I just want to go back to the housing discussion because again, like
Yes.
maybe I missed it when you were listing all the things, but just and again, and maybe I am missing something, but I'm just going to be very honest and upfront. This has been the most frustrating subcommittee for me because I have yet to hear anything about how we create accessible units. What kind of accessibility are we creating? Type A versus Type B. What kind of like stock are we trying to do? What are the accessibility standards that we're trying to secure for common areas like laundry rooms, like whatever, right? Mail rooms. Also, how are we going to make sure that these accessible units are affordable and that they are along transit corridors so that we can also promote people being able to get around and get employed? And then also thinking about contracting for those with invisible disabilities, like around plain language. Again, I am not hearing a lot of solutions for the housing committee, and I'm really tired of it at this point. Need to do better. We have to do better. So do better.
Understood. And let me just quickly, one on the plain language, that is very much front and center, as is some of the stock and inventory. You raised something that I had not had on my radar, and that's things around common areas. I will make sure that we elevate that. And I will also follow up with you offline to have a separate discussion about specifics and how I can make sure we're getting at these. But at least a few of those we are on the same page on.
All right. Last thing too is like, how do we connect those people then with those accessible units to the people that need them, whether we're talking about people with a disability and or aging. So like, do we create an incentive-based system? So that's something we have to think about too, is okay, once we create the stock, how do we make sure we're getting it to the people that need it? So just as a caveat.
I appreciate that, and we will put that on the conversation. I think it's a great point, and I appreciate you flagging that. Any other specific thoughts on any of the subcommittees we've gone through, or what you, at least as we sit here today, will find most useful as you receive it from them? I know we've got, Rep Ortiz, is your hand back up or is just still up?
Sorry, I didn't put that back down. So you guys.
All good. No. Julie, I think I saw you coming off mute. Was there something you wanted to add? No? Okay. You will find me, I am maybe a little over eager trying to read body language and make sure I don't miss anyone on these calls. I don't have anyone from the public who has asked to speak. I know we've got the Lieutenant Governor's staff, we've got CCRD staff. We do have some members of the public who I believe are just listening in. If you'd like to join in, I think I saw Mr. Winkler's hand pop up. Did it go back
Accident.
down? Okay.
I noticed Kirsten had speed up on hers, and I think maybe that was trying to hit hand up.
That is only because I don't know how to press those things. I was more giving the thumbs up when the comment was made about the afternoons. That's much better for me.
Gotcha. We will speed up on the afternoons then, Kirsten. Understood on that. With that, although we are 15 minutes to go, I'm not going to keep you on just for the sake of keeping folks on. We will follow up with all of you on the scheduling in May. It sounds like folks are good. Push it up, push it back, either way. I think we're all agreed. We're not going to try to do it on the Friday before Memorial Day. We won't do it on Memorial Day. We'll stick for right now to our afternoon calls. My commitment is to all of you to make sure you're receiving the minutes and the agendas that Carrie cranks out every time we have one of these. We'll also start getting you some of the trial ideas that these committees are developing so we can discuss those as a task force. If you have additional thoughts, as I say at each of these, and I mean it sincerely, please don't hesitate to call, text, or email Carrie or me. We are relying on all of you to guide us to do the best job, that you get the best information possible from these subcommittees. We also continue to invite all of you and welcome you joining and listening in on these subcommittee conversations. I think they've been some really informative discussions, but it's also helpful for us to get your reaction. If you're able to view any of the videos or join and tell us, hey, I think there's some important points you need to make sure are covered. With that, I will open it to task force members if anyone has any final thoughts. Mr. Ortiz.
Hey, I just want to thank everyone and just show gratitude for everyone's skills, time, and expertise. You know, this is kind of a groundbreaking task force, and I just want to remind everybody that, make sure that they understand kind of what they're a part of here. You know, it's this work and others that is kind of breaking a lot of ground, and there's going to be a lot more opportunity and ways to filter the recommendations here to really be the model and the example for the rest of the nation, how we create equity and finally fully integrate people living with a disability into their communities so they can enjoy the amazing economic opportunities, outdoor opportunities, living opportunities that this amazing state has to offer. So just want to show gratitude and say thank you, and let's keep working hard, but let's make sure that we're making tangible gains and kind of try to start moving away from these esoteric 30,000 foot conversations and really start putting some legs, some wheels underneath this, I guess. There's a better way for me to say it.
I will not try to follow that up. I will thank everyone. We will follow up by email, and we will see you in somewhere between 3 and 5 weeks again, or on a subcommittee between now and then. Thank you all, and we'll